Welcome to the Virtual Center for the Study of the Constitution and Civic Responsibility, an ongoing inquiry into American political origins and evolving institutions. The Executive Director of the Virtual Center is Dr. Bill O'Brien. He's also your host for this continuing conversation. Here he is now, Dr. Bill O'Brien.
Thank you, Bob Kincaid. Thank you and welcome to today's edition of the Virtual Center for the Study of the Constitution and Civic Responsibility. Today is Tuesday. It is the 10th day of November in the year 2015. It is a pleasure to be with you today. I remind you, and I know that many of you know this, but that tomorrow is Veterans Day, and I just want to kind of make it a point in case somebody didn't realize it. Tomorrow is Veterans Day, and I think that's very, very important. I've noticed a number of issues and notices today. I'm particularly interested in my brother's father-in-law, who just passed away about a year and a half ago, was an Iwo Jima survivor, and his daughter, my sister-in-law, put a notice on Facebook today about that, reminding us of tomorrow. And of course, she's still, and I understand this because I'm doing the same thing. We're still having a little bit of trouble getting used to the fact that he's not with us. He was 91 years old when he passed away. So, for the longest time, obviously, he was with us. And the stories about the numbers of times that we walked into restaurants and department stores and stuff, and he would have that Iwo Jima cap on, and people would just stand up and applaud, and it was amazing. I mean, it was just amazing, the experiences that we had with him. So tomorrow is Veterans Day, and I want to remind everybody of that. If there might be a chance that somebody hasn't. I'm sure over the next 24 to 36 hours, people are going to get many, many reminders. And I don't mean this in a facetious way at all, but I think that it's pretty unfortunate in some ways when you look at the accolades and the honors being heaped upon our veterans, when we look at the way that many of them are treated or not treated, as the case may be. I think that, sometimes the accolades are rather empty. They seem to lack substance, and that's unfortunate. And I think that there are many people that on this particular issue talk the talk, but are unwilling to walk the walk. And I do believe that that's very unfortunate. But be that as may, it is a pleasure to be with you on this Tuesday, the 10th day of November, the day before Veterans Day. I do invite you to participate actively in our program. I think I spent a little bit of time in yesterday's program talking about that in a little bit more detail than I plan to go into on it today. But I do invite you to share your ideas and your thoughts with our listeners. We have a phone number that is there particularly so that we can make it possible for you to be heard, should you choose to be heard. The phone number is area code 304, and the number is 640-6495. 304-640-6495. If you'd like to share your thoughts directly with me, one-on-one, I would love to hear from them in an email. My email address is waobrien906@gmail.com. waobrien, OBRIEN, 906, all one word, @gmail.com. And again, I remind you that we do have a Facebook page dedicated to the Virtual Center. And if you go to Facebook and type in the Virtual Center for the Study of the Constitution, you will see our Facebook page. And while I haven't put anything on it in the last 48 hours, I did post on Sunday evening an article which appeared in our statewide paper, the Charleston Gazette, on Sunday. And I do believe, to be quite honest with you, that I was a little bit reluctant to put it on because it's a little bit lengthy for Facebook. And I know if you're like me, and I'm kind of new at Facebook, but one of the things I've caught on to rather quickly is that if you put things on there that are too long, many people won't read them. And part of the reason is because it takes so long to go through Facebook. I find, as I become more comfortable with it, I find myself eager to look at Facebook in order to pick up on the latest news, as it were, about people that I know. And I think other people, I'm sure, are the same. And when you run into an article or a link that takes you to an article that's quite lengthy, there's an inclination to say, oh, I don't really want to deal with this right now because I don't have that much time or whatever. I'm beginning to understand that. So anyway, I was a little bit reluctant to put this on Facebook. But on the other hand, I also know that there are a number of folks who do subscribe and participate in Facebook that are not going to see the Charleston Gazette in Charleston, West Virginia, for one reason or another. So I thought, well, if I want people to know about the article that I had in it, then the only way to do it is to post it on the Facebook page. So I did that on Sunday evening. But I think, very honestly, we'll be, as part of today's program, I think we'll probably be getting into that, into the substance of that article anyway. So maybe by the time we finish today, either you won't need to go to the Facebook or to the Charleston Gazette to catch a copy of the article, or better yet, maybe if today's presentation is a little bit successful, then maybe you'd be so enthused that you'd want a copy of this article, in which case I'll be glad to make that available to you as well. So again, I look forward to the program and I look forward to hearing from you. So, if you are not uncomfortable about getting on the air and you have thoughts, and of course what we're talking about, the subjects we're talking about, especially over yesterday and today, I think you'll find, are subjects that most of us have something to say about, because it's something that most of us care passionately about. And so if you feel that there are issues that I'm not addressing, or issues that I'm maybe not giving the focus and the attention that you feel they deserve, then by all means feel free to give us a call and bring that to our attention. I think everybody would appreciate it. Yesterday's program, as you'll remember if you were with us yesterday, we dealt with the idea of Hamilton's economic program as system. And mainly yesterday we spent more time talking about the idea of system than we did about the specifics of Hamilton's program itself. I believe I touched on them again, but most of that content we dealt with last week in our programs. The details, the specifics of Hamilton's program. The theme or the issue that I wanted to focus on yesterday was the issue of system. The idea of an interconnected, interdependent system comprised of a number of parts. In the case of Hamilton's program, a number of different policies and programs, all of which contributed to the design or the operation of an economic system, an economy, as a nation's economy, as it were. And I tried to emphasize, I hope I did successfully, that Hamilton was very, very aware of the fact that what he was designing, what he was recommending to the First Congress in the series of reports that he submitted to Congress in 1790, 1791, did indeed constitute a system. And the point that I was trying to emphasize yesterday, a point that I was trying to emphasize yesterday, was that in Hamilton's world, in the world of the 17th and 18th century, the idea of system was very significant and very important. And those people who read and thought and considered themselves to be knowledgeable and educated, well-read, if as it were very, very knowledgeable, very aware of the concept of system because it was dominant in that particular period. Since we finished yesterday's program and thinking about yesterday's program after we finished yesterday, after get off the air, it dawned on me that this is one of the, I think, important issues or important items that for one reason or another has fallen through the cracks in terms of the way we look at history, especially the history of the 18th century. You don't see too much emphasis or too much awareness of this reality. And this reality is that people thought in the context of systems, of interconnectedness, of the way that things related to each other or connected. We found over in previous months here at the Virtual Center, especially as we were looking at various Federalist papers, that Hamilton and Madison both looked at the Constitution and looked at the way that they chose to defend and explain and rationalize the Constitution from the perspective of system. There's absolutely no way to look especially at the writings of James Madison without recognizing that he looked upon the Constitution of the United States as a system, as a political system or structure or organization that functioned. And we can remember, I hope, I know I do, that Hamilton, in a number of his Federalist papers, talked about the requirement, the absolute need for a vital, vigorous national government at the forefront, if you will, of this constitutional system that we call the American Republic under the Constitution of the United States. And the reason I say this is because there's so much emphasis in today's political world about getting rid of government. Going back to President Reagan's very famous adage that government is not the solution to our problems, he said, government is our problem. And from that point on, a whole litany of challenges and attacks on the vitality and the vigor of government itself has been a major part of the ideological message being put out there by conservatives. I think we'll hear that tonight in this coming debate, Republican debate this evening from Milwaukee. That what we're going to see, in spite of the differences between the candidates, I trust that we will see the similarities among the candidates. And one of those similarities is the general agreement that the answers to America's problems do not lie with government, but rather lie with people's ability to get around or go through or run over government. The idea that our government is too big, it's too expensive, it's too intrusive. All of that, I would point out to you, contradicts the thinking of the founders in the 18th century, because these men and women, those that were involved, I'm thinking of Abigail Adams, of course, and a number of others, those who considered themselves to be educated in the 18th century were products of the Enlightenment, so-called. And what we know historically as the Enlightenment was part and parcel of the worldview that stemmed directly from the key elements of what we call in the 16th and 17th centuries the scientific revolution. And more specifically, I'm thinking of Isaac Newton. Newton basically gave us the information we needed to appreciate the extent to which our universe was a system, was an organized system that functioned according to what, for lack of a better term, we call natural laws, laws of the universe, laws of gravity, for example. And the fact that the planets and the stars are not out there crashing into each other, but rather operate in some sort of very unique system, tended to prove to the thinkers of the 18th century that if there's order in the universe, if there's order in nature, then that itself becomes the model or the benchmark that man must use in order to measure the effectiveness of his own institutions. In other words, the ideal or the model was order, predictability, stability, all of those things associated with organized, ordered systems. And for those of us who are familiar with the social sciences, who have a background in social science, we know, whether it's political science or whether it's sociology or psychology or history, one of the things we know is that in society, man set out to create institutions. These institutions were designed to contribute to the stability and the predictability and to the total benefit of the society at large. And so in theory then, the priorities of any society are reflected in the nature of the institutions that that particular society creates. And the assumption is, or the idea is, that society's institutions become mechanisms by which people are able to deal with the world as it's understood at that time. In other words, the accepted worldview of that particular time. So, for example, and I think we've done some of this before, the whole idea of institutions. There are certain elements of institutions that I think all institutions have in common. They are man-made. They are designed to accomplish a purpose. They have a reason for being. There are particular outcomes or particular results that a particular institution is supposed to accomplish. And therefore, the way that the institution is organized and the way it functions is driven or ought to be driven by the desired results or the desired outcomes. In other words, institutions by definition are not random. They don't just happen. They are the product of plans, of strategies, with the intent to accomplish certain things. And if we understand the purpose, the ultimate purpose of institutions, then we can begin to appreciate the way those institutions are set up, the way they are organized, and theoretically the way they function. And any society is comprised of a number of institutions. Its education system, by definition, fits the idea of institution. The family is an institution. Religion is an institution. Politics, the structure of government itself, is an institution. Marriage is an institution. One of the a book that was very, very popular a number of years ago, a very, very popular and well-done movie with Nicholson, called One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, was about an insane asylum. And the whole nature of an asylum as the epitome of an institution. And the assumption is that within that institution is a built-in system of rewards and punishments. Because by definition, institutions reward certain behaviors and penalize other behaviors. The law, corrections, the corrections system, the jail system, the prison system, all of these things are institutions theoretically with a socially desirable outcome or goal. And of course there's debate all the time about the particular goal, whether in fact the purpose of an institution, of a correctional institution, is to rehabilitate or, as many people believe, to punish. But theoretically, the whole idea of corrections itself, at least in the modern age, is directed towards the idea of rehabilitation. It's not an accident, for example, that the issue of reform is built, the whole idea of reform is built into the idea of reformatory. The point I'm making is man's institutions by definition are systems. They theoretically function as systems. The economic system that Alexander Hamilton fashioned in 1790-91 as proposed to Congress was an economic system. The economy, from this perspective, is an institution. And it's made up of a number of related, interdependent parts. And it's designed to function a certain way. And that's what we spent most of our time on in yesterday's program here at the Virtual Center, was looking at the nature of the economy as a system. And theoretically, a system where certain behaviors produce certain results. Certain inputs lead directly to predictable outputs, so to speak. And the point that I was trying to make is that our system is based on the model of capitalism. It's organized, institutionalized capitalism. And it involves a very visible, a very important role for government. When we talk about eliminating government from the equation of the economy, we're talking about an approach to capitalism which is quite contradictory to the initial system set up. We talked in last week's programs about the origins of the modern capitalist system and the extent to which capitalism, by definition, at least in its beginning stages, depended directly on government. Business needed government. It needed government support. It needed government's funding. It needed government's protections. It needed government's infrastructure. And the result of that relationship between government and the business sector, or the middle classes as they were called then, was the development of a system that functioned. Of course, the theory is that as capitalism developed, government could play, in theory at least, a less and less visible role in that system. But to think for a moment that you can actually exclude government from the system and look upon government as the major obstacle to the operation of capitalism or the opposition of that system, I believe is naive. But again, this is a debatable issue. This is what liberals and conservatives debate all the time. Is the role that government plays the role that government ought to play, the role that government must play within our system of modern free enterprise capitalism? But for purposes, I believe, of particular agendas, there is a very concerted effort on the part of many to emphasize the idea of individual freedom as being the principal driver of capitalism, and to define or paint government as the major obstacle to freedom. The issue that this particular agenda puts forth is that depending on how visible or how invisible, how strong or how weak, how active or how inactive government is, reflects directly on the degree of individual freedom that exists within that particular society or that particular economy. The idea that the more government there is, the less freedom there is. The more individual freedom you want, the more you must restrain and contain government. Because the thinking is that government is the major obstacle, the major enemy, if you will, to individual freedom. I would suggest to you that this agenda is designed to set up what I believe is a false cause and effect situation. It becomes very clear that government is absolutely instrumental in the success of capitalism. And we touched upon in yesterday's program a few of the reasons for that, and I just wanted to touch upon them again briefly. Government has a very distinct role to play. And this is tied up with the idea of the economy as a system, as a functioning institution. And the point that I was trying to make yesterday is a system, by definition, is designed to operate or to function. And when it doesn't function, it's really no longer a system. And this particular system, which we call the economy, is based to a large degree on the idea of trust, faith. People need to have faith, not just some people, but in theory at least, all your people. In order for the economy to function smoothly, people must have trust, must have faith, must believe that the system is basically fair, that the system is not loaded or structured to benefit certain people at the expense of other people. Government's job is to sell that. Government's job is to convince citizens, the society at large, that the system is basically fair, that there are rules by which it operates, and that there are certain behaviors which violate the rules. And government's job is to enforce those rules and to penalize those who break them. What makes this extremely difficult is that the more you begin to think about and understand the nature of capitalism, the more you begin to realize that the system at heart is innately, inherently unfair. That there are certain people, by definition, who have a tremendous advantage over everybody else. The success of your capitalist system, however, depends on the fact that people don't know that people don't see that. And the only way that we can ensure that people don't see and don't focus on the basic unfairness within the system is that the system must keep functioning. As long as the system is operating as a system, as long as goods and services are being distributed, and large numbers of people of your population are deriving benefit from the functioning of this system, then the inherent unfairness of it never becomes an issue. The only time it becomes an issue is when it stops working, when the system breaks down. The analogy, the example that I used yesterday was the idea of musical chairs. The game of musical chairs inherently is unfair. And the reason is because there are fewer chairs than there are people who are playing it. But as long as the music keeps playing, and as long as people continue to parade around the chairs, nobody has time or any inclination to focus on the unfairness of the system. When does that unfairness become visible? It becomes visible when the music stops and people all move to secure their own chair. That's when it becomes clear that there aren't enough chairs. Somebody is going to be denied a chair. And the way the game is played, of course, is we know that those are the people that are out, if you will. You're out. And then the music begins again. But before the music begins again, at least one additional chair is taken away. So that maintains the unfairness of the system. Namely, there are fewer chairs than there are participants. But again, the unfairness of it does not become visible until the music stops, until the game stops, until the system stops functioning. Government's job is to make sure that the system does not stop functioning. As long as it functions, as long as people are working, as long as jobs are being created, as long as career dreams and aspirations are being realized, as long as people continue to seek and be successful in pursuing their educational goals or objectives, as long as a basic general internal pattern of growth, we call it economic expansion, as long as that's happening, as long as the economy is growing, then the inherent unfairness of capitalism never becomes visible. But as we talked about in yesterday's program, we are now experiencing in the society in America of the 21st century the tremendous increase in the maldistribution of wealth and income in our society, the tremendous growth of inequality in our society, the basic inherent unfairness of the system is becoming too clear to too many. And what precipitates that kind of a situation is a downturn like the recession that we experienced in 2007, 2008. And what this, it seems to me, reveals or reflects is a basic failure of government. Because that's not supposed to happen. People aren't supposed to see. For those of us who are familiar with the Wizard of Oz, we're supposed to hear the booming voice of the mighty Oz. We're supposed to see the flame and the smoke and the echo of the booming voice. We are never supposed to see behind that curtain. But as we know in The Wizard of Oz, Dorothy's little dog Toto grabs that curtain and pulls it back and reveals the mighty Oz for what Oz really is. And once we can see that, it's over. The game is over. Government's job is to make sure that we never see behind that curtain. And that becomes possible only so long as the economy is functioning, only so long as system is operating. But in a recession like we experienced in 07, 08, people begin to look around for explanations, trying to figure out what's wrong, what's going wrong, why are so many people losing their jobs? Why are so many people losing their homes? And then people begin to notice that some people are not suffering at all during the recession. And then we look at the strategies for finding our way out of the recession. We called it TARP, the stimulus program. Pouring money into our major economic institutions in order to get them functioning again. The same thing that FDR did when he took office in 1933 in declaring the bank holiday, shutting down all the banks in the country, sending in federal bank examiners, and only allowing the strong, secure ones to go back into business, to open up. The idea being that our institutions are basically on target. The basic faith that we have in the idea that if our institutions are strong, our economy will work. And if our economy works, the system begins to function. But what we've experienced this time is that in spite of the fact that many of us as taxpayers sacrificed in order to breathe life into these institutions. What am I talking about, breathing life into these institutions? We're talking about the bailouts for Wall Street and the bailouts for the corporations and the banks that were too big to fail. But lo and behold, recovery did begin to happen. The economy ever so slowly began to crank up. And system once again began to function. The music started to play, and the game of musical chairs continued.
Hey, Dr. Bill?
But yes, Bob.
You've got John on the line for you?
Oh, great. Okay, this is wonderful. Thank you, Bob.
Go ahead, John.
Hi, John.
Yeah, I hate to bother you again because I'm sure you probably get tired of hearing from me. But
no, I do not.
Your conversation kind of tilted a little bit of a thought in my head.
Uh-oh.
Kind of a mixture of the 18th century and 20th century, or 21st nowadays.
Go right ahead, John.
There was a really major controversy when Jefferson pulled that stunt with the Louisiana Purchase, and he bought land for I think it was 4 cents an acre.
Yeah.
And then I mean the massiveness of that project literally funded the government and many of its institutions for years, because then they could resell the land to private speculators. From what if my memory serves correctly, I mean, it was getting near a generation.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
They were making money off that thing because, I mean, they would, again, they bought the whole thing for only $15 million.
$15 million. Exactly.
Now there's been, if my understanding is correct, there was, even today, you got law professors arguing about whether or not that was even constitutional for him to do that.
Right.
And this kind of ties into what I think you're saying now. I mean, in your musical chair analogy, and this is me being an evil person, yeah, you have a game of musical chairs, and you said it very importantly. When the music stops and the chairs are allocated, and then they get ready to start the game again, and they take away a chair, does this not, I mean, you have the old saying, supply and demand.
Right.
Well, if you control, what happens about the guys who own the chairs? Everybody's playing the game. Everybody wants to get a chair, but but there's somebody out there in the, well, we'll be polite and say ether, who's controlling the number of chairs that are out there.
Right.
And they're always making sure that there's always a little bit less than what's really needed.
Right, John.
And it just kind of caught on me, and I said, let me call Dr. Bill and squirrel him with that just to see what kind of trouble I can cause.
Oh, you're not causing trouble. I think because the thing I was going to mention in response to your situation with about the chairs is that the whole idea of free enterprise is driven by the idea of the need for initiative, for individual initiative.
Yeah.
And what I mean is, if there was a chair for everybody, then nobody would have to worry about the music stopping. There'd be no initiative. There'd be no drive. There'd be no competition. There'd be nothing to spur people on. But in the game of musical chairs, if you know that when the music stops, you're going to have to grab a chair because there's not one for everybody, then that becomes the incentive, if you will, that drives theoretically creativity. In our way of thinking, that's what drives. That's what motivates. That's what drives creativity. That's what. And a lot of people today will criticize our society by saying that there are too many people who have found a way to get their own chair, or found a way to add chairs to the point that everybody gets one. Therefore, there's no reason to put out. There's no reason to worry. There's no reason to get an education. There's no reason for anything like drive or initiative or anything like that. In other words, all the things that make the system go, it seems to me, is driven by the fact that there's not a chair for everybody. And many people believe that the worst thing you can do is guarantee everybody a chair. And that's what government has done today with entitlements, is make it possible for people to make it even though they don't work.
Well, that's where my problem comes in, and that's, again, maybe my weirdness is that the reality is there is enough chairs out there. And there always has been enough chairs. The problem is that some people get to claim more than one.
Oh boy. That's right. In fact, some people go into the chair business, don't they?
Well, we won't say chair business, but it's like, it's like being able to play them. Again, we're using this artificial example to illustrate it, but it's like playing musical chairs, but you're carrying a little inflatable dummy around with you, or a ventriloquist doll or something, and then when the music stops, you plop your butt down, and then you take your doll and you stick it in the one next to you.
Yeah.
To grab the one next to you, which forces the poor child to go and be turned away. And, you get the old supply and demand routine. It's not even a question of, are there chairs, but it's like playing a game of musical chairs. And it's not only that some can claim more than one chair, but it's a bidding process.
Yeah.
How much can you give the magic chair holder to let him, so that you can have a chair for yourself?
Reserved for you.
Yeah, we'll control the chairs. You give us something we want, we'll give you a chair. And one chair of the should be a natural.
Right. Yeah. I understand exactly what you're saying, John. You're exactly right. And one of the another factor would be that if you can get the right contacts, if you can make get the right contacts with government, for example, you can, by law, dictate that only a certain kind of chair can be used. In
Right.
other words, you can't bring your own chair. You got to use my chair.
Yeah.
And
You
so
just use my
basically,
chair.
so what you're doing is you're shaping the rules to benefit a few.
Exactly, and that's where so much of the argument's coming from.
Right. But all of this is behind the curtain, so to speak, or behind the scenes, except when the system breaks down or malfunctions or whatever. One of the things I was thinking about last night, the same example, John. I don't know if, and I've done this. I may be dating myself a little bit, but if anybody listening has ever worked in industry or any kind of a conveyor belt kind of operation, where a highly sophisticated industrial operation of some kind, like the system in some of our largest automobile assembly plants and things, where the chassis moves along this thing and it's assembled as it moves. And I know I've worked in that kind of a situation. And what that means is once you get that system, which is so complicated, so complex, functioning smoothly, then the worst thing that you can possibly have is what they call a shutdown or a malfunction in the system. I've worked in places, and it's one of those places where the operation runs 24/7. It never stops. And what you have is a situation where the people working there are on shifts. And one shift replaces the next shift, replaces the third shift. And then the next morning back comes the first shift, and on and on. And it's generally the rule of the game is that if your replacement on the next shift doesn't show up, you have to work a double shift. Because the one thing that can't happen is a shutdown. Because,
right.
And usually the argument is a shutdown is so expensive. The startup is so expensive, and it takes so long to get this intricate system functioning smoothly again that the expense of that is exorbitant. And companies, corporations don't want to experience that. So they'll do anything they can do to avoid a shutdown because it becomes so expensive. And so the idea is that the system is functioning. And what I know that in my experience, what happened is they would bring in experts, engineers, and their job was to monitor the system in hopes that they could anticipate problems before they caused a shutdown. In other words, if there were little things that might be wrong, which if not corrected would become big things, then you wanted people who had the expertise to be able to spot them. And so certain of your employees were, I can remember that, certain employees were paid an extra fee or paid a bonus, if you will, to act as spotters and to oversee the whole system in order to try to find problems before they became problems and caused and created a need to shut down. But the whole idea is, as long as the operation is functioning, from the perspective of the untrained eye, everything is fine. And so it's the same. I think it's the same in the economy. As long as there are jobs, as long as the American dream seems to be working, as long as our institutions are functioning, our schools, our colleges, our social clubs, our community organizations, our charities. In other words, everything seems to be functioning in sync. And as long as all of that's rolling along, the economy's in good shape. And the irony is it's government that makes that happen. Because government must constantly monitor the system and make the kind of internal adjustments to make sure that the system never breaks down, never stops.
Oh boy, you know, Mr. Ted Cruz wouldn't like you.
Oh, I'll tell you.
He believes that government that shouldn't be involved at all. It should be all private sector.
And that's a myth because you do have something like the general population, the society as a whole. And that's the whole idea of the so-called public interest or the common good. That ultimately, go ahead, John.
No, but you're saying. But the problem is we live in a society now that has, for 30 or 40 years, has been pounding people in the head, arguing against that very factor.
Exactly.
There is no society. There is no us. There is no common good. It's all Ayn Rand, enlightened self-interest, dog eat dog, and anything the government does, like tax you for a little something to pay for a road. No, that should be privatized. That should be made into a toll road so that the people who use the road pay for the road. No,
the
great.
reality
That's all fine and dandy.
But John, the reality is, and I think you know this, if you allow that system without management, without somebody overlooking it and making the kinds of corrections that are necessary, then eventually the system is going to benefit so few that the many will have no alternative but to overthrow that system. We saw this yesterday with the president of Missouri resigning, the University of Missouri. That ultimately, when the football team got involved, and they started to, and basically they started to threaten the revenue that big-time football brings into many of our universities today, the president really had no option but to resign. And I really believe that, I didn't get into the details, and I don't want to make more of this than I have a right to. But from what little bit I know about what was going on at the University of Missouri, it seems like there have been a number of incidents, racial incidents, that the president has chosen to not address, in a sense, to dismiss, to blow off, as if they weren't significant. And so this movement to oust him is kind of an example of the frustration of a system that stopped working. That ultimately the person responsible for keeping the system, which is the University of Missouri, in operation is the president, the chancellor, whatever. Basically, by not paying attention to what was happening internally, he let a bad situation become a worse situation until it reached the point where the whole system stopped. At that point, his failure his failures or weaknesses as president, as manager, became clear. So in essence, I think that's what we're talking about here, is this and this idea that the system can function without being managed, is absolutely naive, because the only way the system can continue to function is if people don't see the inherent inequities and frailties within it. And that's government's job. And government's job is to move resources around and make the kinds of internal corrections with its social programs, with its policies, with things like health care and other things. What you're doing is you're making the kinds of internal corrections which make it possible for the system to keep functioning. And these idiots that are messing with something they really I don't think really truly understand, are jeopardizing the system.
I kind of beg to differ with you. I think they truly do understand. But,
I understand.
I kind of believe that a politician tends to reflect his district. Especially these southern Republicans. I think, if I'm not mistaken, when Virginia finished its thing a couple days ago, when it finished its elections a couple days ago, it became the last the last southern state, it's now the entire South is run by Republicans.
Republicans, yeah.
Governors, with very few minor exceptions and a few minor seats here and there, it's all Republican.
The governor of Virginia, right. is a Democrat. It's the guy that used to be in Obama's, but that McAuliffe. But except for that, and except for the lower house in Kentucky, that's it. The rest of it's Republican. You're right.
Right, and it's hardcore Republican, and and Bob has brought this up a few times on his show. There is a bubbling civil war, and I think that the Confederacy has, as they say in the old music songs, the South has risen again.
Yeah.
And now they're going to take all this mess, and I'm already hearing rumbles about it coming through my things that next year, before or after the election, they're going to start pushing for your second constitutional convention.
Right. I think that's true.
And that's going to just stir the pot. But anyway, I've taken up a good chunk of your time. Let me
thank you, John.
Away
John, you really. I've got to say, what we've done over the last 2 or 3 programs is in large part thanks to you. So please don't apologize. Your calls are great, and you're fantastic. And thank you.
Well, I'm blushing now.
Thanks for everything. No, I mean it. Thanks for everything that you do, and I appreciate that so much. Thank you.
No trouble at all.
Okay, John. I really enjoy that, and I think John's right. I think these people do know because they're able to benefit from the system. They're getting advantages that most people aren't able to get. The problem is when I say that they don't really understand, what I mean is they don't understand the biggest picture, which is by getting these special favors and doing what they're doing, they are causing the system to gradually break down. And by attacking government, they are rendering impotent the very group or the very agency, if you will, that the system needs to have in order to keep it functioning. By attacking government, what you are doing is attacking the person who makes the internal corrections which keep the system moving and keep people supporting it and keep people's faith in the basic fairness of the system, which is inherently not fair. And I really believe this. And I think what's happening is that the very successful, the people, the few, the 1%, as it's called, who are getting all the benefits of the recovery from the recession, are taking money out of the system and trying to use it as leverage against the administration, against government itself. And in the process, what they're doing is taking chairs away. They're taking so many chairs away that too many people are beginning to see the inherent unfairness of the system. And I think that's the danger. Yesterday, at the end of the program, just about this point in yesterday's program, we began to consider the research that was made public a week ago about the mortality rates of older, middle-aged, as Bob pointed out yesterday, those born in the 60s. Not those born in the 50s, not those born in the 40s, not those born in the 70s, but those born in the 60s. Those people that would be now in their upper 40s to mid-50s are committing suicide and falling victim to alcohol abuse and drug overdoses at a rate which is so astounding that it's literally affecting the nation's mortality rates. This is the only group the only definable, measurable group where mortality the rates are increasing rather than decreasing. Everybody else's is going down, except this one. And what it suggests is that the malfunctions in our system are beginning to have effects all over the place, because the reality is the system is a system. It is interconnected. Its parts are interdependent on each other. And what we are dealing with is an economy which has become much more than economics. It's part social, it's part political. It affects our institutions. And it affects the way that individual people are able to deal with the realities of the world that they are living in. And what it suggests is that this one particular group, demographic group, is not coping. And so the question, and this is what we were into yesterday, why? Why this group? Why not Hispanics and African Americans, people of color? And the implication of the researchers is, or the speculation is, that these other groups were never totally included in the mainstream of our society anyway. For so long, they have had to make adjustments. They have had to adjust their expectations. They've had to deal with the realities of their lives as outliers, as people who for one reason or another didn't quite fit. But working poor whites, less well educated, not the ones who went to college, because the ones who go to college are able to make the kinds of connections to other people and other organizations and institutions which provide them a support system that the working poor don't have. Most of these people, if they graduated from high school, they never went any further. Many of them didn't graduate from high school. The only world they knew is the world of work. And what's happening in our economy is directly affecting that world. And the people who have become totally dependent on that world clearly are not able to deal with what's happening, are not able to handle it. And as they get older, and as they begin to realize that their dreams of leaving sizable, meaningful legacies to their children and their grandchildren are not going to be realized. Many of them find themselves with their kids living with them. Many of them find themselves in their 50s raising their grandchildren because their children are unable to find ways to access a shrinking, closing economic system. This thing spells dysfunction all over the place. It's reflected in the inequality, but its implications and ramifications go far beyond the allocation, the misallocation, or maldistribution of wealth and income. Many people I believe, try to rationalize these numbers, are trying to find ways to explain away the markedly escalating mortality rate among this particular demographic group. Many people believe that it's primarily because we've made it too easy for people. There are too many entitlements. It's too easy for people to not participate actively in the world of work. In our society, we have found ways to make it possible for people to survive without working. And all of us are pained and disturbed by the numbers of people we see around us who seemingly have found ways to survive other than what's accepted as the legitimate way to survive, which is to work and support those who are dependent upon you. We find that all of our institutions seem to be breaking down. Our traditional religious groups are shrinking. The numbers of people who are going to church is declining. The number of children being born into single-parent homes is increasing. The two-partner family that all of us grew up with is breaking down. Marriage, seemingly for many, is a bygone or a passé institution. What that means is that many of the institutions, many of the anchors or the support systems that the particular demographic group we're talking about was always able to go to and rely on are gone. They've disappeared. And these people find themselves totally alone, totally struggling with a world they don't understand, a world that they never expected, a world that they could not possibly ever prepare for. And it's overwhelming them. And many of the places they used to go for support, whether it was their church, whether it was relatives, whether it was community groups or community agencies or whatever, are no longer there or functional to provide that kind of support. Let me give you an example. In 2012, there was a research project conducted by a group of social scientists. The results of that research, the data collected, was published in 2012 in a study entitled "No Money, No Honey, No Church." Basically, what the researchers looked at was the declining membership in organized religion, especially among those who were we would consider as moderately educated. people with high school degrees, perhaps, but none of them with college degrees. The result, and I'm looking at I've got the results in my hand, and this is what they say. We find that religious attendance among moderately educated whites, this was in 2012, this was 3 years ago, has declined relative to attendance among college-educated whites. Economic characteristics, current and past family characteristics, and attitudes toward premarital sex help to explain this differential decline. In other words, prior to the research that we read about last week with drug overdoses and suicides and alcoholism, there was already research that was indicating that this group of people had stopped going to church. They had stopped belonging to community organizations. They had stopped volunteering. They had stopped participating in the activities which we usually associate with community life. Their whole world seemingly became focused on their job. And then the job disappeared. And there was nothing left. At least nothing that came close to meeting their expectations. Because they had grown up in a society which believed these were the people, more than anybody else, who from the very beginning were anchored in total faith in the American dream. And when they reached their late 40s and 50s, when they reached the point in their lives where it seemed to be too late to make a major change, they had to go with what they had because they had reached that point in life where it was too late to move, at least they believed it was, to go in a different direction. They suddenly found that the floor of their entire existence was being put, the rug, if you will, on which their entire world functions was being pulled out from under them. If they were able to find work, it paid maybe a third, maybe 25%, maybe 20%, maybe 10% of what they were used to making. They found out that they couldn't maintain 2 cars. They found that they couldn't pay the utilities. And on and on and on. The only alternative is to throw themselves on the mercy of society itself in the form of shelters, food banks, and the rest of it. But psychologically, these are people, many of them, that couldn't do that. The working stiff, the person who in my mind, in my experience, epitomized the people we're talking about was Archie Bunker. Archie Bunker would die before he would take charity. Archie Bunker would die before he would even let the people in his own neighborhood know that he didn't have a job, that he lost a job. Because he grew up in a world where work was plentiful. And if you weren't working, ostensibly it was because you didn't want to. Now, that world has become a situation where if you're not working, it's because you can't find anything. Anything that remotely comes close to what you're used to or what your expectations told you was in your future. But you can't go to other people. You can't go and throw yourself on the mercy of society at large because it's not in your makeup. Chances are you don't even want people to know you're not working. So what do? You drink. You take drugs. You give in to the aches and pains that you were able to fight for years. There's no reason to fight them anymore. And because this entire operation is a system, all of it is a reflection of the changes in our economic system that certain individuals are making. I don't believe they're able, in their own worldview, to take the responsibility for what they're doing. It's much easier to blame Obama than it is to blame yourself. And one of the problems, and I'm thinking in my mind here, the Gospel of Wealth of Andrew Carnegie in the late 19th century. Andrew Carnegie warned his colleagues, his wealthy colleagues, about this. And one of the things he said is, in a world where so many people are struggling, in a country where so many people are struggling in jobs that are unsafe, in housing that is unhealthy, on a diet that is not healthy, in cities infested with crime and filth and disease and all the rest of it. What Carnegie said is the last thing you want to do is advertise your luxury, advertise your wealth, parade in front of these people your success. That's the last thing you want to do. But what do we live in? We live in a world where corporate CEOs are taking huge payouts, where corporations are issuing quarterly numbers on the bonuses of their executives, on the salaries of their CEOs. In other words, what you are doing is dramatizing the degree of success that a few people are experiencing in a society where most people, or many people, are struggling. I would suggest that this reality is being reflected in a number of situations we see. And this research that was done in 2012 focused principally on church membership, being just one example. Let me read you from that study. We've only got 5 minutes left in our program today. We may have to pick up and continue a little bit this tomorrow, but that's okay. This is what the researchers found. The declining economic fortunes of the American working class have attracted considerable academic attention over the last 2 decades. This is the result of studies done in 2006, in 2003. All of this in this survey, or this report that came out in 2012. Already people were looking at the declining economic fortunes of working people. The data that we looked at last week is showing the mortality rates of these people. Because in the 5 or 6 years that social scientists were collecting the data, we didn't do anything about it. You want to find out why? Watch the debate tonight. These people go on. the possibility that other features of working class life, such as the religious life of the American working class, are also in distress, has received even less attention from scholars. This, the religious life, this is a particularly important issue to explore, both because the American working class attended religious services at rates that were similar to those of the college-educated middle class for the middle decades of the 20th century, and because churches have been an important source of social solidarity for the working poor. Churches used to be a place where working people felt comfort and solace. It reinforced their lifestyle. It reinforced their worldview. But when their world began to fall apart, they stopped going to church. This was evident well before the data that came out last week about suicides and alcoholism and drug abuse became public. It seems to me it reflects the interconnected nature of our, quote, economic system. And it seems to me important that we appreciate that. It seems to me important that we appreciate the fact that our founders saw that. Hamilton saw that. He saw that system itself, well managed by people who knew what they were doing, would be able to keep behind the curtain, as it were, the inherent unfairness of the system. As long as the people who were reaping the benefits didn't flaunt those benefits, there was no problem. But when the system becomes dysfunctional, when it stops working, when government is being attacked for redistributing wealth, when the fact of the matter is the redistribution of wealth is what the whole damn thing is about. Hamilton realized that. He started from the very beginning with the idea that you had to redistribute wealth by taking it from the poor and making it available to the wealthy. Now it seems to me we are reaping the benefits of some of those decisions and some of those realities. It's 59 minutes after the hour. We've reached the end of our program. I really thought we'd get further than that today, but that's okay. Because I think we're at the point now where we can kind of put this whole thing together finally tomorrow in our final program of this week's broadcast at the Virtual Center, and hopefully be able to put a bow around the package. Thank you so very much for tuning in today. Thank you, John, for that wonderful, wonderful call. Everybody have a wonderful evening. Be safe. Be kind. And hopefully we'll see you back here tomorrow again at the Virtual Center. This is Bill O'Brien. Thank you very, very much.